It's excellent adventure.
We are live, Mr. Chair, just so you know.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh, what happened?
I got a feedback whether Ryan's turned his camera on.
He's on.
Yeah, I hear too.
Here.
It's me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll get started to call the meeting to order this Planning Commission to order this April 21st, 2021. If staff could call roll, please.
Connie Coleman Lackady.
Unmute.
I know. Oh, okay. Thank you. Present. I tried it 3 times and it wasn't opening.
James Guerrero.
Here.
Ryan Pearson.
Here.
Paul Wagaman.
Present.
Philip Combs.
Present.
Lynn Larson.
Here.
Don Daniels.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Great, thank you. And welcome, Mr. Boki as well. Councilman Boki.
Thank you.
You got it. So before us, we have April 7th, 2021 minutes. Looking for.
I'll
Go
make a
ahead.
motion that we accept the minutes as written.
Commissioner Wegman made a motion, and who was second? Mr.
I'll
Mr.
second.
Larson. Mr. Larson, thank you. Appreciate any comments or changes? To seeing none at this time. Okay, all those in favor by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions?
I
Thank you, Connie. All right, approved as written. Thank you. And do we have any changes to our agenda today?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And then we'll move to number 5, public comments. We'll open up the public comments. Do we have anyone assigned or on the call for public comments?
There's no one on the call. Ms. Devereaux, did you receive any written public comment?
I did not.
Okay, seeing or hearing none at this time, we'll close the public comment period. And then we're going to move then right away to number 6, our public hearing. And we're going to open up our public hearing to 2021 Comprehensive Plan Amendment Package. And we'll start it off with Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to share my screen and just take you through very quickly a summary once more, if I could get it to open for me. There we go. Of the full 10 amendments that are going to be part of the comprehensive plan docket that you take a look at this spring and then forward along with your final decisions and recommendations to City Council for review. So the cycle began last July. There was a call for applications, both from the public and then the city itself deciding whether it wanted to initiate any amendments. Last October, you as the commission took action and recommended a list of 11 amendments that were then considered by council. They held a public hearing on December 7th, and then they adopted the docket. in February of this year, they did a second resolution, which is somewhat unusual, but they could certainly do this, where they took one of the applications out and then they added several parcels to another application. So you'll see those changes as we move through this. And then on March 24th and April 7th of this year, you've had 2 study sessions where we walked basically half and half between the full list of amendments. So tonight is the public hearing, and then moving forward as it sits right now, although this may have already changed, I have to look at the dates again. We're looking at May 5th for you to take action. And then later in May, it'll be May 24th, where the city council begins looking at your recommendation. And actually May 24th is also the date of your joint meeting with them. So that'll work out nicely as well. So to walk through these very quickly before we have the public hearing open, the First Amendment, if you'll remember, is a whole new chapter on energy and climate change. And we walked through this several times now, actually. The recommendation from the department is to approve this. And I know that Mr. Buer does have some additional comments here. Do you want to say them now, Mr. Buer, or do you want to wait?
Now's a good time.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to be asking the Planning Commission to continue the hearing to the next regular meeting. The reason being is we're still waiting for comments from 3 power agencies, as well as Pierce Transit and Sound Transit. All of those groups do have, are listed in some of the policies and implementation measures. I have had conversations with them via email and otherwise. They actually have a lot of proposals and programs that are underway to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. For example, Pierce Transit is in the process of converting their buses to electricity. The first stage is underway with 16 charging stations. And PSE, I was not aware of this, has instituted some very new programs to significantly reduce or get away from entirely greenhouse gases with natural gas, which is a dramatic change in how they produce things. So I thought it would be advisable to make sure that they have an opportunity to submit comments or provide testimony. They seem to be, all 3 seem to be anxious to do so. It's just that it's been very busy for everybody and we haven't had the opportunity to get comments from them yet. So with that, Mr. Chair, when you finish taking comments tonight, there is a request that you continue that hearing into your next regular meeting. And in addition to that, there is quite a few implementation measures. I'm counting them out right now. It's probably close to 80. That's a lot of implementation measures, and I don't think that the commission is interested in doing all of them. What you have is basically a list of just about anything that other cities are doing, and I'm expecting that the commission will want to pare that down. So after this meeting, I'm going to assign the Planning Commission a task, some homework. And the homework would be to go through those implementation measures and pick out your top 10. Now, you don't have to like those implementation measures. You can change the language. You can introduce your own implementation measures, or you can have less than 10. But the idea would be for you to submit these to me via email separately.
Sorry, that happened from my end. My apologies.
Okay. The idea would be for you to go through those implementation measures, come up with your top 10, submit those to me via email independently. Do not send copies of this to other commissioners or we end up having a serial meeting. And then let me go ahead and compare what the group has said and then report back to the commission on May 5th. This whole exercise is an effort to get an idea what the commission is thinking, to see if we can hone down the list a little bit. So I think this might be a good technique to use, and it would be something that you would want to look at after you close the hearing.
Great.
So that really concludes my remarks. I hope I was clear.
Yep. Appreciate any questions for Mr. Buer? Nope, seeing none. Okay, thank you, Mr. Buer.
So continuing through the other amendments, in addition to the new chapter for the comprehensive plan, if I can get it to, oh no, there we go. The second amendment was to update the comprehensive plan and any maps in it that would be affected to recognize that the circled parcels last year were rezoned to industrial business park. And so this is really a technical update, no substantive changes other than to reflect action that you recommended and the council took a year ago. The third one was a similar technical update to recognize the adoption of the 2020 Parks Legacy Plan into the comprehensive plan. The fourth one was to recognize new various housing types that are being encouraged or allowed within the city code based on regional and state level planning policies, regulatory changes, etc. So there's a number of paragraphs of text that you have in your full packet that discuss the programs that Lakewood has in place to encourage and retain affordable housing, but also there's these proposed changes here that you see to the allowed uses within certain zones, and it's to open up for multiple housing types within the residential zones, and then also to allow multifamily of 4 or more residential units within the MR1 and 2 zones. And so that's all in answer to some recent state law changes. Number 5 was one that was anticipated as of last fall, that by now we would have had a new master plan in place for the Western State Hospital campus. That actually has not come to pass. There's been a delay in the submittal of the master plan proposal from DSHS for a number of different reasons, but what that means in terms of this application is we're recommending it be postponed until next year. Number 6 is to recognize once more in the comprehensive plan and any related maps the fact that the downtown subarea plan has been adopted and the council is on the cusp of adopting the Lakewood Station subarea. And so by the time the action would be taken on this by the council, the Lakewood Station district would also be in place. Number 7 was the one that the council asked be taken away. And if you recall, number 7 was related to creating a new center of local importance on the east side of the city for industrial uses. That was its focus. The council pulled that out of this package and did not provide direction to move it to a future cycle or anything. So at this point, that issue is gone and unless and until they bring it back. So jumping to number 8, this is the most complex of the amendments this year. And you'll see a couple of different things on this slide. First of all, there's a recommendation under sub 1 and sub 2 to rezone a number of parcels. And this map up here on top is relating to those in proximity to the Berkeley interchange for I-5. This was originally a private application for these 3 lots up here or parcels up here, because right outside of the picture is that Berkeley interchange, which has, as you know, been totally rebuilt. And the recommendation you have here is in addition to those 3 originally requested, a number of others, and about 6 or 7 more additional lots to be rezoned in order to make this a logical progression of uses along these 2 streets and then down toward the interchange. And then the other piece was the addition by council in February of this year of 4 additional parcels to be rezoned in relation to a Habitat for Humanity project that's carrying out a abatement process that's started about 10 years ago in the Tillicum neighborhood, making sure that those are zoned correctly to be able to handle the new affordable housing units that the Habitat for Humanity is building. The third part is, this is a sideways map, I'm aware, but I did that so the geographic orientation is correct, unless I have it completely upside down, which I might, sorry. Tillicum And this is the 1999 vision for what would happen in that area of the city. And coupled with this, you have a 2011 neighborhood plan that was adopted. And the recommendation is that both of these things need to be updated to 2021 and beyond. And so the full amendment is to rezone parcels near the Berkeley interchange, rezone parcels in Tillicum for the Habitat for Humanity project, and also to direct the department to begin a review of the language and the mapping in the comprehensive plan about the Tillicum area, and also the 2011 neighborhood plan, update that as well. The 9th Amendment is as a text change to just recognize that the city no longer uses, or maybe never did, community renewal areas. Recommendation there is to approve. The 10th one is to add in what were basically left out by error when Title 18A was updated a few years ago now. Various water supply related facilities where they would be allowed within the city by zone. And so expanding the list of the type of facilities and then also listing where they would be allowed in the city. Recommendation is to approve. And the final amendment is responding to the 2020 Bill 1754, by which the state legislature said local governments, you will allow religious organizations the ability to host homeless encampments or temporary or transitory accommodations. And there is a statute which is cited in the proposed Lakewood Code that you would have to follow in what you can and cannot regulate in those types of encampments. And then also taking out, because this is the new language, just removing the reference to transitory accommodation. The idea here is hosting the homeless by religious organizations is the term, and this is the cite to the state statute that directs or regulates that. So where we are tonight is the public hearing, and it's recommended that, as Mr. Buer was just explaining, this be kept open until May 5th. And then there's also the request to send the information, your top 10 or however many items you want to respond about. I know Mr. Buer said to send it, to him. So ignore Karen Devereaux and send it directly to Mr. Buer if you would. May 5th is going to be a consideration of amendments and action by the commission on the amendments as a whole docket. And then, as I mentioned earlier, these dates have been shifted a bit, but May 24th is the day that the city council is scheduled to take all of this up. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, for the hearing.
Great, appreciate it. So at this time, like Ms. Spear mentioned, public hearing is now open. And do we have anybody online?
We have no one on the call or through Zoom to testify. Ms. Devereaux, did you receive any written public comment? Oops. See if she can unmute.
Thank you, Ms. Spear. I did not receive any written comments.
Okay, does any fellow commissioners have any comments, questions? Yes, Mr. Guerrero.
Just a question about the Habitat for Humanity properties that are proposed to rezone. The neighborhood there is, I think it's R3 zoned, and it looks to me like it's kind of an isolated little entity that looks a bit like spot zoning to me. I'm curious if that's the case, or there's special dispensation for this particular type of use there.
It's not spot zoning. It's dealing with 4 parcels. A single parcel is what you're talking about when you get into spot zoning. And secondly, this is, I'll turn this over to Mr. Buer in just a second because he's been tracking this longer than I, but this is something that should have been included in your packet last fall, but because one of the parcels was in foreclosure at the time, the Habitat for Humanity was not able to submit the application in a timely way. But other than that, maybe Mr. Buer, you can explain the history of these 4 parcels.
Under state law, it's not spot zoning as long as you change the comprehensive plan so it matches the underlying zoning. So in addition to being more than one parcel, because we're also doing a comprehensive plan amendment, technically this is not spot zoning. Now, I will say to the commission, when we go back and revisit the Tillicum neighborhood plan, you may wish to also revisit the entire zoning and comprehensive designations in these areas.
Great. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Guerrero.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm actually really in favor of Habitat for Humanity and Tillicum. I think they're doing a great job. Just that where those parcels are located, immediately adjacent to them is not a great building, but it is a multifamily building, and then adjacent to that's another multifamily building that I was thinking, if we're rezoning, why aren't they included? But it sounds like we'll revisit that in the next go round, so that's fine.
Great. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Combs.
I was just gonna piggyback on that, and this is a question more than a comment. What related to the Habitat for Humanity, which I'm also a fan of, you know, when done right, it can be a real win. I'm curious, is it being evenly spread throughout the city, or is it just in Tillicum right now that we're seeing a big influx of, not a big influx, but a lot of additional development?
I would tell you that Habitat has purposely chosen to work in Tillicum in an effort to try to stabilize the neighborhood and create single-family home ownership opportunities. And it has had an impact on the elementary school. And so that has been a philosophy of theirs over the last 10 years, is by bringing forward home ownership, can you change a neighborhood? And I believe the answer is yes. And so they have continued to work in the area. We do have other affordable housing associations working elsewhere in the city of Lakewood using other home programs and CDBG funds. They're more concentrated, I believe, in the lake off of Washington Boulevard and in that general area of the city of Lakewood. But there's more and more interest piqued by a variety of different groups at looking at infill sites in Lakewood. And one of the things that is talked about in the energy and climate change is revisiting infill lots. One of the things that we have learned when we started working on the contaminated sites request of the city council, we got into a lot of depth on how to redevelop properties, and using that same process, going back and taking a look at existing single family residential uses. I think we may find out that we have a higher opportunity for housing than we thought. Now, again, one of the problems that we will run into if we do this study is we will run into issues with water lines and sewer lines, because there are sections of the city that cannot support additional density unless those districts decide to enlarge their pipes. And it is beyond the capability of one developer in many cases to do that work. So.
Great. Commissioner Wagaman, you had a question? Unmute.
Thank you. Got to teach me how to use this thing again. First off, tell me a little bit about spot zoning. What's the issue there that we're talking about? Is this have
Spot
to do with
zoning? Yeah, spot zoning is a term that is included in state law, and it is prohibited. And the idea there is you are looking at a single parcel and you say, we're going to rezone that for whatever reason, and everything else around it isn't affected. So it's not an area-wide discussion. It's not a comprehensive to the city discussion. It's somebody has requested, or the city wants a specific parcel to change its use, and it's rezoned without a comprehensive review prior to it. And so there are questions often when local governments get into their rezoning process. Is this appropriate? Has this been adequately vetted in the right levels and the right scope? And so I think it's, with this issue, again, the way that this has been handled, it's not a spot zoning situation.
I just want to be clear on the definition of what that means. You know, I mean, we're going through this whole diversity, equity, and inclusion, and certainly if you're doing favoritism, and that's what it sounds like.
That's, yeah,
Yeah.
spot zoning is a negative term. It's prohibited in law. And that's the idea, is if you had, you know, I'll give just a horrible example. It never has happened, but somebody's friends with a council member and says, hey, I want to rezone my parcel so I can put a new business on it. And the answer is, okay, go ahead, without any other analysis than that. That's an extreme example.
Extreme. Okay, thank you. And then to follow on what we're just talking about, the with the water pipes not being big enough. You know, I sat on, when I was on the transportation committee, sat with our water district and talking about pipes. And one of the things I asked them when they're putting new pipes in, could we, since we know we have to grow, want to grow, that the problem there was is if you put bigger pipes in, then you have a stagnation problem until you start using enough water, and then you have the bacteria and stuff builds up, and so that's a problem. But certainly if we want to do this infill, that's something that probably we need to make sure that the council is aware of, and that they're working with the water district and how we're doing that, because you know, certainly the right time to do it is when we're going to repair a street, then we get half of it paid for by the water district, and it saves us money all around. So that's really a long range planning thing. And since we're the planning commission, that's probably something I don't know if we need to do a study on that or whatever, but make sure that happens.
Great.
I can tell you that our public works department meets quarterly with the various utilities that are in the city to let them know when various road projects are going to happen, to try to be able to coordinate as much as possible.
Yeah, great. Any other questions that we have? Yes, Mr. Larson.
Paul, one of the reasons to disallow and make spot zoning illegal is just simply to prevent incompatible neighboring land uses. And so that's its principal function. And that's why nobody should allow it by state law. Secondly, I don't know if it's within our purview, but I was noticing today that there's a transportation element, and that's the people were cycling the cross arms and for all the train crossings, and they had every crossing that had a train crossing in Lakewood blocked at the same time. You couldn't leave Lakewood by any route except Gravelly Lake Drive, which goes over the railroad tracks. And I wondered if that is anything to do with the planning that we are about in this committee, or whether how that works. I'm new on the block, so I just thought I'd float the question.
The short answer to your question is we're pretty much preempted from doing anything in the railroad right of way.
Okay, I seem to remember that.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions regarding our comp plan? Yes, Mr. Buer.
Just to follow up a little bit with Mr. Larson, we actually did try to address this issue in Superior Court several years ago, and we lost. And the judge said you have some very earnest and legitimate issues, but the railroad is the railroad, and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, seeing or hearing none and no other testimony for our public hearing. So we will continue the public hearing until the close of the May 5th meeting, when we will then close the public hearing for any written comment. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right. So a continuation of the public hearing. Okay, we'll move on. No unfinished business, no new business. Reports from staff.
I'm just going to walk you quickly through a status update for what's happening with some regional planning efforts, starting with Vision 2050. The last time we went through some of this information, we didn't have Mr. Combs or Mr. Larson on the commission. So I'll just walk you through this quickly. But land use law in 5 minutes or less in Washington State. We start with the Growth Management Act, which is the foundation for what all of you do ultimately on the Planning Commission. It's the state statute that says there's urban areas, there's rural areas, and within the urban areas is where we're going to plan for our growth. And then it has a lot more detail, obviously, than that, but the cities are where most growth is anticipated to happen in state law. Then you have what are called multi-county planning policies. And for us in the Central Puget Sound, that is called Vision 2050, meaning we're looking at it in 2020 and 2050 is the planning end horizon for this document. It's put together by what's called the Puget Sound Regional Council, and it covers King, Snohomish, Kitsap, and Pierce counties. That's why it's called the multi-county planning policies. So those policies, going back up the ladder, have to be consistent with the GMA, but also the next level down, you have countywide planning policies. So in Pierce County, there are Pierce County countywide policies. They have to be consistent in turn with Vision 2050. And then at the bottom of this little rainbow, you see comprehensive plans. And so the City of Lakewood's comprehensive plan and its development regulations have to be consistent with the countywide planning policies, multi-county planning policies, and the Growth Management Act. So a lot of different layers here when you finally get down to writing city code or administering regulations. Vision 2050 was just updated, and it happens every 10 years. And so Vision 2040 was replaced by 2050 last October. And we're now in the process at the regional level of having PSRC start to roll out implementation guidance. So saying cities and counties, as you start looking at the countywide planning policies you deal with, how to update them, here's some suggestions. But then the other things that happen are allocations of population to various jurisdictions, including Lakewood, and that's called the regional growth strategy. So these things are now starting to happen as after effects, if you will, of the adoption of Vision 2050. So basically, Vision 2040 was in place for 10 years. It had a strategy for growth for the whole area. There were planning policies and actions related to them. In Vision 2050, it's the same thing. But some new tweaks on Vision 2050. There's a much more of a focus on regional effort. And for the first time, we're talking about housing as a regional process, a regional planning item. So rather than just the City of Lakewood planning for the housing it's supposed to have within its borders, for instance, it's now becoming a discussion about up and down the I-5 corridor throughout Pierce County. How do we all work together to help ensure affordable housing for everyone? There's also new discussions about incorporating equity and health recognition, I guess I'll say, in all of the actions. So for instance, understanding that the way a city is laid out can affect people's public health, whether it's because they are living next to a transit or traffic hub, or whether it's they're able to walk to where they work or walk to where they go to school. That affects people's public health. And then there's also within Vision 2050 a number of other things that fall out of it. So the transportation plan, economic strategy, regional centers framework, and others as well. All of this is going to be incorporated into countywide planning policies by 2022. And then the City of Lakewood has until 2024 to update its individual comprehensive plan to be consistent with all of this new stuff. Speaking of the regional growth strategy, this is an effort and then ultimately a document that says all of the jurisdictions in Pierce County, but including Lakewood, this is the number of people you're supposed to be planning for. And within the growth strategy, there's different types of cities based on their size. And so here in Pierce County, Lakewood, Puyallup, and University Place are all called, quote, core cities. They are the big ones after Tacoma, which is called a metropolitan city. And the way the population was allocated, long story short, these three jurisdictions have been assigned, quote, 85,000 people by 2050 that they need to absorb, and also 44,000 jobs. this process where the sausage is now made, where those three jurisdictions are negotiating with each other and potentially other cities that are called other types to help absorb these people, either that the number itself or more or less, depending on what's happening in any individual jurisdiction. So within the city of Lakewood, there's also a regional growth strategy, a regional growth center. It is the same as our downtown sub-area. It's where most of the growth and most of the jobs are located and planned for within the city. So it's planned by 20 years after the adoption of that sub-area. There's going to be quite a few more people living there and quite a few more jobs. And that's consistent with Vision 2050. The other thing that's within the city is not only that regional growth center in the downtown, but a high capacity transit station, the Sounder Station. There's also the Pierce Transit Hub in the downtown. But the idea under Vision 2050 is growth is supposed to be encouraged near these high capacity transit stations and within regional growth centers. So what we have already is our downtown sub area, which is right there in the center. And then we're also, as you know, looking at the council adopting the Lakewood Station sub area, which incorporates the Sounder Station here within the next month. Going back to that idea that Lakewood, Puyallup, and University Place are supposed to be absorbing 85,000 additional people by 2050. The city of Lakewood took a look at those numbers. The response was actually transmitted back to Pierce County and the consultant working with them on assigning these individualized numbers to all of the cities in February, that basically said, given a number of different realities within the city of Lakewood, the number that you think we're going to absorb is not going to happen. They had assigned the city 72,000 people by 2030 and an even higher number by 2050. However, there's a number of reasons why the city is saying that's not going to happen. And let me back up, I'm sorry. Between the 20-year period of 2000 to 2020, Lakewood has grown a total of 3%, meaning an average of 0.1% growth per year. And so the idea that it's suddenly going to grow by tens of thousands in the next 10 years or so is just completely out of range of what's happened historically. Secondly, and you know this already, but Lakewood is not a full service city, meaning the agencies that govern water, sewer, power, and emergency services are all separate agencies from the city. And so the idea of trying to do long range planning and growth planning like other jurisdictions might do can't happen in Lakewood. There's a lot of coordination needed, and there's also decisions that are made outside of the city's control regarding capacity. Third, within the city, there was a calculation done. There's a total of a little over 12,000 acres of the city. But because of certain land uses that, again, the city is not going to see change, it can't in some cases change them. The development capacity within the city is reduced by a total of 52%, meaning more than half of the city's acreage is not available for additional densification over time. And what you see here is that list. There's the area on the east side of the city with air corridor zones and the clear zone near where McCord Field airplanes fly. There's the military lands themselves. Then there's a number of acres involved with Western State Hospital campus, Pierce and Clover Park colleges, the hospital complex, St. Clair's, I should say, Clover Park, Sound, and Pierce Transit, and then other city-owned properties. That's 20% of the city there of itself. Another 14% are the lakes, and then there's 13% in addition to that of open space. So if you add all of that up, again, it's 52% of the city's acreage. And so here's a map of where within the city the black areas are areas that are just not available for any additional growth. So this whole part over here, which is mostly residential, this needs to eventually get less dense, not more so, in order to comply with Department of Defense and FAA guidance on safety in being so close to McCord. You've got the Western State Hospital complex, and you've got some public institutional here, but there's other things throughout the city where there's just not the capacity to grow. So rather than the large number that which was 80,000 or something for the city by 2050, the city has requested 68,000 instead, based on all of these things that I've just gone through. And then to go along with those ideas that you see in Vision 2050 about how you're supposed to be planning for growth near transit and taking advantage of those transit centers, the city has, within the last 2 or 3 years, adopted the downtown sub-area plan and is about to adopt the Lakewood Station District one. And between those two, you're going to get up to 9,500 more people just within those two sub-areas if all the planning is correct and we end up with that type of density, and then a number of jobs as well. So we're in the middle of that discussion with Pierce County and the other core cities. That will wrap up later this summer. This county council will be adopting the new countywide planning policies consistent with that higher level with the Vision 2050 stuff by next spring. And then by 2024, as I mentioned earlier, Lakewood needs to have updated its comprehensive plan and development code to be consistent with Vision 2050 and the new countywide planning policies. And so I don't know if Mr. Buer wants to add any more to that, but just wanted to give you a progress update. There'll be more to come with all of this as we move further down the line within the next year or so. But in the 22 and the 23 comprehensive plan cycle, so not the one you just had your hearing on, but starting next year, you'll start to see some of those types of amendments as well. It'll be Vision 2050 changed to say X, so the city count plan now needs to say Y.
The only thing that I would add is that ultimately, it is the Pierce County Council that sets the population numbers for the city of Lakewood. So between now and when they take action, there's going to be a whole lot of politicking done to see how those numbers turn out. So just an FYI on that.
So Mr. Buer, on this subject, I noticed that our neighboring, the metropolitan city, Tacoma, had discussion regarding R1, more density in R1s, you know, to change that in some discussion. Can you comment on that?
Well, if the city council wishes to remove the lower density zoning districts, R1 and R2, that would be a substantial amendment to the city's land use documents. It's possible, but that's also a significant increase in housing units.
Mm-hmm.
You may end up requiring an EIS with that particular request. That is a major change in the city's regulations.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions in regard to what Ms. Spear just presented, Mr. Combs? Oh, yeah, mute.
Ms.
Yeah.
Spear, I was wondering if you could just talk through the differences on the multi-county plan. How does our exemptions or adjustments compare with the other counties? I know that we're reduced, 52%, which I'm just curious how that shakes out with the other ones. And then as a follow-up to that, when we say, hey, we can't do our 85 that you guys have assigned us, and we say we're going to do the 8,000, what does that have a negative impact on them in the sense that they have to pick up the slack, or how does that work on a larger level? And I'll go ahead and mute for that.
Tiffany, you're muted right now.
You unmute.
Sorry about that. Okay, the first part of your question, the city of Lakewood has lakes and other environmental constraints on certain parcels. And that's certainly something that you would see in other jurisdictions. And so I don't think you would find any city in the area able to truly just, without any restrictions, grow on 100% of their parcels. However, in the city of Lakewood, what you do have are 14 lakes, which is somewhat unusual. You have JBLM and the restrictions on land because of the flight path. That is unique to Lakewood in the central Puget Sound. And you have Western State Hospital, which is unique. It is the only one on this side of the state, like its name implies. And then you have 2 colleges. And so those 4 things, even if not just the environmental constraints, are unique to Lakewood, and they increase the amount of unbuildable land within the city. And that's been communicated to both the people at the Pierce County level and also PSRC, we haven't gotten a firm answer back as to whether they're going to take those into account and say, okay, you're quote excused from growing because of these things, but we're certainly advocating for that. The second part of your question, yes, under the regional growth strategy, there's a total number of people and jobs that are saying you, Pierce County, and all of your cities have to absorb. And then what happens is this sausage making process where the county then says, okay, we have 23 cities and the unincorporated area, and various cities are at different sizes right now. That's why we're called a core city. You as core cities are going to take, I've just thrown a number, 10% of the total growth. The other cities and towns, you're going to take 20% of the other growth because there's more of you than of the core cities, and we could divvy it up among all of you. Metropolitan city, you're going to take 15%. And then whatever's left, whatever that number may be, the unincorporated urban area will take. So if Lakewood and maybe some of the other core cities or other cities altogether say, we can't take that amount, and here's our reasons why, the sausage making process then morphs into, okay, this is the total we have to absorb. So who's going to take more? Who's going to take less? And that discussion, that's pretty much where we are right now. The core cities have said for various reasons, we can take X, Y, or Z. And there's discussions happening with unincorporated county and the city of Tacoma to see if there's a way to kind of move some of the growth projections around. And so, yeah, picking up the slack is one way to put it. There's a total that the county as a whole has to deal with, and we're trying to figure out how that's going to play out.
Yes, Mr. Buer.
The other option to this is consider the assignment a math exercise. Knowing that you're not going to grow at that level. So play the game with PSRC and say that you've met the numbers so that you can get your transportation dollars. That's the other way of looking at that. That's what we've done in the past. I'm sure other cities do the same thing. But there's other ways to skin this cat. Right now, we just have to go through the process and see how it unfolds. The other thing that I would also point out, though, is King County controls PSRC. They have the majority of the population, and as such, they are the ones that are really establishing policy, not only in Pierce County, but other counties in the regional area.
Yes, Mr. Wegeman.
Well, I mean, as you look at this whole problem, I mean, the Growth Management Act wants to keep open spaces in our state, and that's overreaching priority. I think that we want to see. We don't want to see trailer houses on every piece of land. So the people, if we in fact grow, I mean that's an unknown, but they kind of look at how things are going. But if we do grow, the people need a place to go, and so we have to have some thoughts for that. I mean, we talked about it earlier. Just for water. How do you move enough water into places to do that? And for us in Lakewood, we know that buildable land is short, so that means we got to go vertical. So you can be in New York City, you can have all these high rises. I mean, heaven forbid, but that's a piece. And so if we're going to do that, really, we got to talk about infrastructure. So these conversations, as frustrating as they are something that needs to happen. That's why we have planning commissions and we have all this stuff. What reasonable conversations can we have that'll bring about the common good for our community?
Yeah, good. Any other comments? Seeing none at this time. Mr. Councilman Urboki, would you have some reports?
Yeah, a couple items. First of all, I want to thank Tiffany for that analysis. That's an excellent analysis of the for a very short presentation. I was at the PCRC meeting last week. I was on it for years. One of our two representatives that we have, and now Councilmember Farmer. I'm an alternate now, and so I went and they use the exact same word, sausage making. It's always been my impression that, and I'm just going to go off topic here a little bit, but it's always been my impression at the PCRC that for the most part, I won't speak for every city, but I have a general feeling that everyone wants jobs. They don't want people. So, right. And so, I mean, they agree that there's some people that live there, but they really, and overall, Pierce County has a rather low, or I guess is the right way to put it, jobs to resident ratio. King County is much, much higher, meaning they have a lot more jobs compared to the number of people they have. We have a lot less jobs compared to the number of people we have. And that for the county as for Pierce County as a whole is a big rub. And it is a big problem, and it's going to be a problem for a long, long time. And that's where a lot of the battles really are taking place, because they want to talk about climate change, and they want to talk about not commuting to work, and then they want all the jobs. So it's like, well, if you want people to work, you got to have people working closer to home. So I don't believe that that's been resolved. I don't know that it'll ever get resolved. And that goes to Mr. Buer's point about where the power lies in the PSRC. And but I will say that is a major concern going forward. We do have to take the increases in population, but the other battle is really over jobs, and can we have industrial centers and that kind of thing. And Lakewood's really in the middle of that, because you can see that we're a good place to do business. We're on the I-5 corridor. We do have lands available to develop for businesses. And so that's another ongoing going We looked at the city council looked at the Lakewood Station District Plan the other night. We are going to look at it again on Monday, May 3rd. I'm looking up at the calendar, and it's still on April. Monday, May 3rd. And we will be probably considering some amendments, but I don't have those in front of me. The other thing we've got going on, and we only had some preliminary discussions at the council, but the American Rescue Act was passed a couple of months ago. Those funds should be arriving. It was supposed to be 60 days after passage. So I was told yesterday by somebody at the county that that would be May 5th. And the city of Lakewood is expecting $14 million over 2 years. So $7 million more or less should arrive. The Rescue Act is a lot different than the CARES Act last year. If you remember the CARES Act, all the money was supposed to be spent by the end of 2020, and it was very prescriptive. And cities like Lakewood did not get anything. In fact, the county got the money and the state got the money, and they were supposed to give it out to places like Lakewood, and we did get some. And then there was some other sources of funding also. And it was very directed, very prescriptive towards dealing with COVID and its effects. The Rescue Act is much, much different. A lot of the other things like rent relief and those kind of things are coming down in what I call other tranches through other means. There's business relief in there also. So, and this money can be spent over 4 years. We have until December 31st, 2024 to spend it. And we can also use it to replace lost revenue from last year. There's a lot of things to consider that in the CARES Act we didn't have to consider, or we didn't really have the choice to consider. So this is an interesting thing. It is a lot of money. I mean, it's $7 million, and if you consider that our general fund in any given year is about $36 million.
Oh.
So hopefully we will have some public comment on that as to what folks would like us to do with that. And you're certainly welcome to weigh in tonight. So that's all I've got for tonight. Thank you very much for what you do. I know these are very important meetings, and thank you.
I appreciate it, Councilman Boki. Any comments from fellow commissioners? Seeing none. Okay, great. So I then will call the Planning Commission adjourned for tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you.